What's up guys, welcome to another Big Riff Games tutorial, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a character controller like you would have in Call of Duty Advanced Warfare with the boosts and the sliding. And you can see here I'll show you what we're going to be doing today, and at the end I'll give you all of the resources that we have for this controller so you can try it yourself, or you can just follow along this tutorial. So here you can see you got the boost jump and you have the slide, and you can do it in the air as well. It's a little choppy with the video recording going on, but it's pretty close to what you see in Advanced Warfare. So you can see here the double jump, pretty close, double jump and boost. So first I'm going to start from a character controller that we already have for first person shooter, and we're going to modify it to add the jump, the double jump, and the dash. Okay, so here we have a script that I pulled off of the asset store. It's your basic FPS script that you'll find, and this is a character controller opposed to a rigid body, which is a little bit easier to add force to a rigid body, but the character controller is a little better for first person shooter type games, and it makes it a little more complicated to add a force like a boost or a dash. So we will be showing you how to do that, and I'm going to run through it real quick just so you understand the basics of what's here already before we start adding to it. So we have a couple variables. These are public so you can access them in the UI. And so we have speed, which is the speed that you're running around, jump speed, which is the speed that is applied to you in the Y direction, gravity, which is the force pulling down on you when you're in the air. So we have reference to our character controller, which is on our asset in Unity, and our first function that we see here is the awake function, and this basically just makes sure that your controller gets initialized to your game component, and if it's not there, you're going to add it to your component. Down to the update function, we have a few things here. We have a variable called collision flags, which is a flag that holds true when there's a collision between two objects. And then we have our isGrounded variable, which will tell us when we're touching the ground, which checks the collision flags and references here collision flags collided below. That just checks collision from beneath the character. This if function right here, this if statement, it says if we are on the ground, then we can move around. For this script, when you're in the air, you won't be able to move around. You can only move around when you are on the ground, and you can only change your direction when you're on the ground. So when you're in the air, you might want to be able to influence your direction a little bit, so you could change that, but in this script, you can only move when you're on the ground. And we have move direction, which is just a vector 3. So this will hold the information and pull data from your inputs, which horizontal and vertical, which that is the WASD keys by default, and the arrow keys too, I think. And then we have move direction equals transform.transform direction. So this will transform our vector 3 into the appropriate direction that we are facing. So when we push A or D, we want to move side to side, but we need to know what direction we're looking at first. So this transform will do all the math for you and will do the appropriate translation on your character based on the direction that you're already pointing. And then once we have that in our move direction variable, we want to multiply it by the speed that we set up here. And after we have the move direction manipulated by our input and the speed, this one has it before, you could be before or after. It has controller.move, and it moves it in the direction times the delta time, which is the time in between function calls of the update, and that will move your character. So now that we have our character moving around, there's also one other piece in here, which is the jump, and it just reads for input if you're on the ground for jump, and it moves your move direction variable, or it adds to your move direction variable by the jump speed that you set. And then we have our move direction.y, which is manipulated by the gravity variable, and again time.delta time, so it's consistent throughout the function calls. So let's modify this so we can put our own character controller controls in there, and the boost and the jump, or the boost and the dash is what I'm going to call it. Let's start with the boost, so I'm going to add a function, void boost. And this is basically just a double jump for the character, and I'm going to do pretty much the opposite of what the gravity is doing. I'm just going to apply a force in the Y direction. We are going to call it boost force. So up in your variables, let's name a new variable float boost force. I'm going to put that at 20. So here we just want to allow the player to boost once per jump. So I'm going to make a flag, public bool, used boost equals false. And we want the boost to happen only when we are in the air, so I'm going to add this kind of the same way that you would add the jump here, but when it's not grounded. So I'm going to add else if not is grounded and not used boost. So this will run when we are in the air and we haven't used our boost yet, and we want to get the input and jump the player with our function down here. So similarly to this, let's copy and paste this. If get button jump, then I want to boost. Here the input.getButton function will return true anytime that you have that key down. So jump is the space key, so if you have it down, it will always be true. And we only want this to fire one time, so I'm going to change the input.getButton. This will only fire then the first frame that you press the key, instead of firing true every single frame that the key is down. So this eliminates any chance for something to fire twice when you only want it to fire once. So get key down, and it takes a key as an input, so I'm going to put space. So now we're going to add a dash ability, which is a little more complex than just adding a value to the Y direction, and also we want to set it on a timer because it can happen more than once during a jump. You can see that you can use it twice in most cases, and you can use it on the ground as well. So we are going to write a function that adds a force to the character like a add force on a rigid body would do, but since we don't have that functionality with our character controller, we're going to add it here, and then we're going to tell it when you can boost and how often you can boost by adding a timer as well. So I've added a bunch more variables here. At the top we're going to need a ground dash force, which is the force we will use when we're on the ground, because it's a little different than when we are in the air. And then I added an air dash force, similarly to the ground, but it'll be different. A mass, so we can affect how much the force is affecting the object, and dash timer and dash delay as well for our timer. And then I added a vector3 impact that will tell us how much of an impact to push on the character, since it can be in the X and Z direction instead of just the Y direction. So we're going to need to hold the information in this vector3, and then we have this vector3, and then we have another vector3 that wasn't in here before that should have been, and this is the move direction, which was in the original script but got taken out somehow. So now we have all of our variables, and let's make a dash function, void dash, and we want to determine if we're in the air or we're on the ground, because we have different rules for each. In Call of Duty you'll see you can't dash forward, straight forward when you're on the ground, but you can when you're in the air. So we need to distinguish whether we are on the ground or not, and if we are on the ground, to disable dash when you are moving straight forward. So I'm going to create a function and say if, and tell it basically all the scenarios that it can dash. And so if you're in the air, we want to be able to dash. So if you're not on the ground, is grounded. Or we want to tell it if you are on the ground and you are pressing sideways or backwards, you can. And the reason why I'm not going to write just if you're not pressing forward is because if you're not pressing anything, you don't want it to dash in a particular direction. So I'm going to add this piece of code which says if it is on the ground and you are pressing A or S or D, then you can allow a dash. And clean up our parentheses there. And first we want to take the input data that we have from before, and because we only take the input data when we are on the ground, we want to update it for the frame that we are going to boost. So I'm going to use this code and tell the move direction what input that we have when we want to dash. So then it can tell us what direction that we should be dashing in. Then again we have the transform.transform direction, which will put us in the right direction instead of just left or right to the world map coordinates. Now once we know the input and we know that we can dash, we want to add the impact to the player. So now we'll have to set up a function that will add an impact to the player, and the way that we can manipulate the player movement is to add controller.move and tell it which direction to go. So we're going to create a function that will tell the controller where to move, and we also want it to be a force. So over time we want the variable to diminish, so it appears that it is a boost force or a temporary force added to the controller. So I'm going to create a new function, and I have this function here called add impact, and this will take the direction that you input, which will be the direction that you want to add the impact, and how much force you want to apply to that direction, and it will apply it to this variable impact, which we have up at the top as a vector 3, and then we will take that direction, and if the y direction is less than 0, then we want to give it a positive value so that it will go up instead of down into the ground. And for our dash we won't need this, but you can use this add impact in other places, that you can just add impact to a player or enemy after getting shot or anything like that. So we're going to leave that in there, and then we apply it to our variable, which we will then push through controller.move to manipulate our character movement. So now I'm going to add an if statement to check the impact magnitude and only apply if it is greater than 0.2. Other than that, it will be negligible to the character movement. And we have our controller.move, and then we put our impact variable that we apply force to in this add impact, and that will move the character in the direction of the impact. And we want that impact to diminish over time, like we said. So I'm going to add a piece of code here that will change the impact over time and set it to 0, the lerp function, which basically takes the first variable and makes it go to the second variable over the period of time that you define in the third input. Now we need to tell the dash to apply to the impact. So I'm going to add a piece of code here that adds impact to our character controller, and we want to add it to the X and Z directions only, because the Y direction, that will be affected by our boost. The dash sideways and backwards we want just to be on the X and Y axis. And then for our force that we want to apply, remember the force on the ground is a little different than the force in the air. So our input to the force is this piece of code right here, which is a ternary, which will basically say check if it's grounded. If that returns true, it will return the first variable that you apply. If it's false, it will apply the second. So if it is grounded, apply the ground dash force. If it is not grounded, apply the air dash force. So next we need to tell the script when we want the dash to be applied, and I have it as the left shift key in this if statement, input.get key down, same way as we did before, left shift and dash after that. Now this should work for your character controller and apply the dash, but there is nothing to stop it from happening over and over as fast as you can press the key. And we are next going to add a timer to this so that you can only press it every 0.75 seconds. I found is a good time to delay. So we have our variables that we added earlier, dash timer and dash delay, both float variables that are public, so you can change in the UI if you want to modify it. So for this timer, we are going to apply a value to the timer, which is equal to the timer delay, and then it will decrease over time and when it hits 0 or under, we will know that we can apply another dash. So in our if statement, I'm going to put and timer is less than or equal to 0. And now all we have to do is tell it what to assign to the timer value when we hit the dash button. So we can do that in the dash variable, and if we do apply a dash, we are going to set the timer equal to the delay. So once we dash, it will assign the value of delay into timer, and the last thing we need to do is decrease that value over time. So in our update function, we will set an if statement. If dash timer is greater than 0, because if it's less than 0, we don't care, it's ready to use and we don't need to do anything to it. But if it is greater than 0, we want dash timer to decrease by time delta time, which is the time in between function calls. And now we are done with our script. And one last thing that I noticed, we never added a variable for is grounded. So up here you just want to put public bool is grounded equals true. It doesn't have to be public, but I think it's easier if you do have problems to see if it's correctly identifying when you're on the ground. So if we go back to our scene, so we have our movement and we have our boost and our dash. You can dash sideways, dash backwards, and if we wanted to make this more like the Call of Duty, we could add a vibration on the screen to the camera when you're boosting to give it more of a forceful type look to it. And also the next thing would probably be to climb up side of cliffs when you're near it, which is what happens in the game. If you want to see that kind of stuff, let me know. I can do another tutorial and expand on this. And also check out our Call of Duty Zombies series. We are recreating Call of Duty Zombies, giving all of the assets out for free, and this is actually one of the maps that we are doing. And I'm not sure yet, I might add this functionality into the Zombies game. I obviously would have to modify it because you'd be able to hide from the zombies pretty easily. But let me know what you guys think in the comments, if you think that maybe just the ground dashes would be helpful in Call of Duty Zombies. But be sure to check that out, and please like the video if this helped you out, and remember to subscribe, as we will be adding more videos like this a couple times a week, at least once a week. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.